The late October air smelled of rain and dying leaves as Todd Barrett's old pickup truck rattled down the narrow rural road. The headlights cut weak tunnels through the encroaching darkness, while the trees, stripped half bare, reached skeletal branches overhead. It had been a long day of driving, and though exhaustion pressed heavy on his shoulders, Todd felt an unfamiliar kind of relief. For the first time in months, maybe even years, he believed a fresh start was waiting for him. In the seat beside him sat Indy, his dog, head lifted high and ears perked. The retriever mix had his nose pressed against the crack of the window, sniffing curiously at every new smell the country had to offer. Indy had been Todd's companion for nearly 5 years, through the breakups, through the lonely nights in the cramped apartment back in Chicago, through the drinking spells Todd was ashamed of. Loyal, patient, and protective, Indy was more than a pet, he was the only family Todd had left. "Almost there, boy," Todd said softly, glancing at him. Indy turned his head, his amber eyes gleaming briefly in the passing headlights, and let out a small chuff, tail wagging. Todd smiled despite the ache in his back. The house they were moving into had been his late uncle's place, left to him unexpectedly in the will. A 2-story farmhouse at the edge of a forgotten little town called Manton, surrounded by woods and fields. It had sounded like exactly what he needed: quiet, space to breathe, and the chance to rebuild his life without the constant noise of the city. But as the road narrowed further, lined with thick trees and occasional glimpses of dilapidated barns, Todd felt the faint stirrings of unease. Out here, the dark seemed thicker, heavier, almost alive. The way his headlight struck the trunks and branches made shifting shapes dance along the periphery of vision, figures that weren't there when he looked directly. He shook it off. Too many hours behind the wheel. That was all. At last, the driveway appeared, a gravel path nearly swallowed by weeds. Todd slowed the truck and turned in, the tires crunching loudly in the quiet. The house revealed itself after a curve in the drive, looming, old, its paint faded to a weathered gray. A porch wrapped around the front, sagging in places, with a swing that creaked faintly though no wind stirred. The upstairs windows reflected the headlights like blank, watching eyes. Indy's ears went back, a low rumble starting in his throat. He pressed closer to Todd, his gaze locked on the house. "Easy," Todd murmured, reaching over to scratch behind his ears. "It's just a house. Our house now." But the dog didn't relax. Todd parked and cut the engine. Silence dropped around them, so deep and absolute it seemed to smother the crickets and owls. For a moment, Todd sat there, staring at the shadowed outline of the farmhouse, the chimney leaning slightly, the dark roof disappearing into the night. He tried to imagine it in daylight. Tried to picture himself fixing it up, making it livable. The idea felt forced. Indy barked suddenly, sharp and loud, making Todd jump. The sound echoed off the trees. The dog's hackles were raised, teeth bared toward the porch. "There's nothing there," Todd said, though his own voice lacked conviction. He grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment and opened his door. Gravel crunched under his boots as he stepped out. Indy followed, staying close, his body tense. They walked up the overgrown path to the porch. The swing groaned again, moving slowly, though Todd saw no breeze. He aimed the flashlight at it. The chains rattled faintly, as if touched. The beam swept over the porch, then up to the front door, a heavy thing of dark wood, the paint peeling. Todd's stomach tightened. He told himself it was just the atmosphere, just moving jitters. Places like this always look different at night. Still, when he slid the old brass key into the lock and pushed the door open, the smell that met him was not welcoming. Stale, damp, faintly sour. The air felt thick, like something had been festering too long in closed rooms. "Guess we'll have some cleaning to do," he muttered. Indy sniffed cautiously, growling low. The flashlight beam swept across the entryway, a wide hall with cracked wallpaper, a staircase leading up into shadow, and rooms branching off on either side. Dust danced in the light, and somewhere deep in the house, a faint creak echoed, like someone shifting weight on old floorboards. Todd froze. Indy bristled. "Settling house," Todd said quickly, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to convince. "Old wood. That's all." He led Indy inside, setting down the box he'd carried from the truck. The beam revealed old furniture shrouded in sheets, corners lost in shadow that seemed too dense for the light to penetrate. The air was colder inside than outside, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones. They moved from room to room, Todd forcing himself to narrate, as if speaking would banish the oppressive silence. "Kitchen's not bad. Needs new appliances. Living room's huge, could be nice once it's cleaned up." Indy didn't wag his tail. His ears stayed flat, eyes darting constantly to the corners and doorways. Once, he lunged suddenly toward the shadow under the staircase, barking furiously, teeth flashing. Todd spun the flashlight, but nothing was there, only darkness, yawning deeper than it should have. "Indy, hey!" Todd pulled him back by the collar. The dog resisted, growling. Then, just as abruptly, he stopped, but his body stayed rigid. Todd's unease deepened. He'd always trusted Indy's instincts. The dog had a way of knowing things, when storms were coming, when someone at the door had bad intentions. Now, he was behaving as if the house itself were hostile. By the time Todd hauled the last box inside, his nerves were frayed. He set up a sleeping bag in the living room for the night, too tired to bother with upstairs. Indy circled close before lying down beside him, head on his paws, ears twitching at every sound. The house groaned around them. Pipes ticked faintly. Somewhere above, a soft thump echoed, as if something heavy had dropped. Todd told himself it was an old house adjusting, but his grip on the flashlight stayed tight. Sleep came fitfully, broken by half-heard noises. Once, Todd woke to Indy growling at the darkness of the hallway, his eyes fixed on the staircase. Todd sat up, shining the light, but saw nothing. The beam trembled in his hand. At some point, he drifted again. And dreamed. In the dream, he was standing on the porch, watching the swing move back and forth though the night was utterly still. The sound of its chains creaking grew louder and louder until it filled his head. Then he realized someone was sitting in it. A shape, featureless, hunched, swaying. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. When the figure turned, its face was a blur of shifting darkness. It opened a mouth that stretched too wide, and from it came not a voice, but a wet, guttural whisper. "Good boy." Todd jolted awake, heart hammering, breath shallow. The room was silent, except Indy was no longer at his side. Panic surged. Todd scrambled up, flashlight beam cutting across the empty space where the dog had been. "Indy." His voice cracked. A bark answered, muffled, from upstairs. Then another, sharper, frantic. Scratching claws on wood. Todd's blood ran cold. Indy was upstairs. In the dark. With whatever had made those sounds. And the only thing Todd could do was go after him. Todd gripped the flashlight like a weapon as Indy's barking echoed down from the second floor. It was frantic, desperate, unlike his usual deep-throated warnings. This was different. It was the bark of an animal cornered, fighting something he couldn't see. "Indy." Todd's voice cracked in the oppressive silence of the house. He cursed under his breath and forced his legs to move, crunching across the creaking living room floor toward the staircase. The stairs loomed in a beam of light, each step yawning like a rotten tooth in the dark. The railing was dusty, its banister scarred with old scratches as if someone, or something, had clawed at it years ago. Indy barked again, closer now, followed by a snarl that made Todd's blood run cold. The sound was guttural, animalistic, but it didn't sound like Indy. Todd swallowed hard and set one foot on the bottom step. The wood groaned under his weight. Just an old house, he muttered to himself, though he didn't believe it. Old house, new sounds. The flashlight trembled in his hand as he ascended. Each step creaked louder than the last, as though the house resented him moving deeper into its body. The air grew colder, carrying with it the sharp tang of mildew, and underneath that, something fouler. Like iron. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched in both directions, doors lining it on either side. The wallpaper here was peeling worse than downstairs, long strips dangling like withered skin. Shadows pooled in the corners where the light didn't reach. Todd froze. Indy had gone quiet. "Indy," he whispered, the word barely audible. Then came the sound, claws scraping against wood, just ahead, behind a half-closed door to the left. Todd's heart pounded. He edged forward, pushed the door open with his shoulder, and swept the flashlight inside. It was a bedroom. Old, abandoned. The bed frame leaned against the wall, its mattress collapsed in on itself. A dresser stood crooked, one drawer missing. The floor was littered with dust and fragments of plaster. And in the far corner, Indy. The dog stood rigid, teeth bared, fur bristling. His entire body trembled with a low, guttural growl that vibrated in the stillness. His eyes weren't on Todd, but fixed on the space beneath the broken bed. Todd followed his gaze. He almost wished he hadn't. The shadows under the bed were impossibly deep, darker than they should have been. They seemed to writhe faintly, pulsing as though alive. And in the center of that shifting blackness, eyes. Not animal eyes. Not human either. Pale, gleaming orbs that reflected the flashlight but did not blink. Todd's breath caught. His throat locked, unable to form words. Indy barked, lunged forward, snapping at the darkness. The thing beneath the bed shifted, pulling back into itself, retreating with a wet, sucking sound. Todd staggered backward, heart hammering. What the hell? The eyes vanished. The shadows receded as if they had never been, leaving only dust and silence. Indy stayed tense, growling low, his gaze still fixed under the bed. Todd forced himself to kneel, shining the flashlight directly beneath it. Nothing. Just rotting floorboards, cobwebs, and shadows that behaved like shadows should. But he knew what he'd seen. He yanked Indy back by the collar, retreating into the hallway. His skin crawled, his mind racing. Was he hallucinating from exhaustion? No. Indy had seen it too. The house groaned again, deep and resonant, like something shifting in its bones. The sound came from the far end of the hall, where another door stood slightly ajar. Todd didn't want to go near it. Every instinct screamed at him to grab Indy and leave, to get back in the truck and drive until dawn. But this was supposed to be his new beginning. His new home. He couldn't just abandon it after one night. He steadied himself with a shaking breath. It's fine. Just shadows. Just my head playing tricks. But even as he said it, he knew he was lying. He backed down the stairs, Indy glued to his side, still growling faintly. They returned to the living room, where Todd shoved the flashlight onto the floor to free his hands. His palms were slick with sweat. Indy finally settled, though he remained alert, eyes darting toward the staircase every few seconds. Todd sat on the edge of his sleeping bag, burying his face in his hands. The dream from earlier replayed in his mind, the figure on the swing, its whisper. Good boy. His stomach turned. The words hadn't been meant for him. They'd been meant for Indy. As if something in this house had already acknowledged him. He rubbed his face, forcing himself upright. He had to think rationally. Sleep deprivation could cause hallucinations. Moving stress, too. He hadn't eaten properly all day. That could explain it. But Indy's behavior, no. He trusted Indy more than he trusted himself. And Indy had seen it too. The night dragged on with no more disturbances, though Todd never truly slept. Each time his eyes closed, he thought he heard faint whispers, like voices bleeding through the walls. Sometimes they were just out of earshot, words indistinguishable. Other times, they were sharp, cutting through the silence. Here. Watching. Good boy. Each time he snapped his eyes open, flashlight ready, Indy was already staring into the darkness, ears twitching. By the time gray light finally seeped through the grime-caked windows, Todd felt hollow, his nerves raw. He made coffee in the rusted old percolator he'd found in the kitchen. The bitter liquid burned his throat, but at least it was hot. Indy lay at his feet, eyes heavy but alert, refusing to rest. Todd stared at the staircase. Even in daylight, the upstairs felt oppressive, as if the shadows clung more stubbornly there. He knew he had to go up again eventually. He couldn't just avoid half the house. But not yet. Instead, he opened the front door and stepped outside. The morning air was sharp and cold, filled with the smell of wet earth. The porch creaked beneath his weight, the swing unmoving now in the daylight. He let Indy wander the yard, sniffing at the overgrown grass, though the dog never strayed far. His body language was still tense, tail low, ears flicking constantly as if he expected something to leap from the shadows of the trees. Todd leaned against the porch railing, sipping his coffee, trying to shake the unease. But the woods surrounding the property pressed close, silent, oppressive. No birds sang. No insects buzzed. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath. A chill slid down his spine. He glanced at Indy, who had frozen mid-step, nose raised. The dog growled faintly, staring into the tree line. Todd followed his gaze. At first, he saw nothing. Just the thick press of trees, trunks gray in the morning light. But then, movement. A flicker, too fast to be wind, too solid to be a trick of the eye. Someone, or something, was standing among the trees, half hidden by the shadows. Tall. Motionless. Watching. Todd's grip tightened on the coffee mug until it cracked. His pulse roared in his ears. He blinked, and the figure was gone. Indy barked furiously, hackles raised, lunging toward the tree line. Todd grabbed his collar before he could charge. "Easy, boy. Easy." His own voice shook. There was nothing there now. Just empty woods, silent and still. But Todd knew he hadn't imagined it. The house wasn't just old. It wasn't just settling. Something was here. And it was already watching them. The woods never felt right after that morning. Even as the sun climbed higher, melting away the night's shadows, Todd couldn't shake the image of that figure standing between the trees. It hadn't moved like a deer, hadn't shifted like a trick of light. It had stood, tall and deliberate, like it had been waiting for him to notice. Indy wouldn't stop pacing the porch, ears pricked, growling low every time the wind stirred the tree line. Normally, the dog would have been tearing through the yard, tongue lolling, a blur of golden fur chasing scents only he could understand. But not here. Not now. Indy kept his body close to the house, circling, protective, like he understood that the danger wasn't out in the world but around them, inside the very walls of the home Todd was trying to convince himself was livable. Todd rubbed a hand over his stubbled face, exhausted. "We just need to settle in," he muttered, more to himself than to Indy. "New place, new smells, new sounds. That's all. Give it a week and this'll feel like home." But the words rang hollow. He forced himself to spend the day tackling small tasks, cleaning out the kitchen cupboards, pulling sheets off the old furniture, scrubbing years of grime from the counters. Indy followed him from room to room like a shadow. Every time Todd dropped something, every sudden clang of a drawer, Indy barked sharply, as if expecting something unnatural to answer. When evening fell, Todd realized he'd been subconsciously avoiding the upstairs all day. He hadn't set foot back up there since the night before. The memory of those eyes under the bed still clung to him, sticky and unshakable. But he couldn't avoid it forever. He told himself he was just being practical when he grabbed the flashlight and headed for the stairs, Indy pressing close behind him. He needed to check the bedrooms, maybe clear one out enough to sleep in. A grown man couldn't spend every night in a sleeping bag on the living room floor. The steps groaned under his weight, the air growing colder as they climbed. Indy's nails clicked softly on the wood, his breathing quick and shallow. The upstairs hall was dim even with the daylight leaking through the cracked blinds. Shadows clung to the wallpaper, peeling in long strips. A smell lingered, something faint, metallic, almost like old blood. Todd chose the first room on the right, forcing the door open with a grunt. Dust swirled in the beam of his flashlight, but otherwise the room was empty. No furniture, no bed frame. Just wooden floors scarred by time. "This one's not too bad," Todd murmured, more to keep himself talking than anything else. His voice sounded small, swallowed by the silence. "Could make this the bedroom." Indy sniffed the floor, his body tense, tail stiff. He gave a sharp bark toward the far corner. Todd swung the flashlight. Nothing. Just the wall, cracked and water-stained. But the bark had rattled him. His heart pounded harder. "All right," Todd said, backing out. "Next one." The second room was worse, a collapsed bed frame, piles of rotting newspapers, a mirror leaning cracked against the wall. Dust caked everything. The mirror caught the flashlight and glared back a fractured reflection of himself and Indy. Todd's skin prickled. The reflection seemed wrong. For a heartbeat too long, his reflection hadn't moved with him. Its head had lingered, eyes fixed, before snapping back into place. Todd staggered, nearly dropping the flashlight. "No," he muttered, shaking his head. "Just tricks. Just light." Indy barked furiously at the mirror, teeth bared, lunging forward. His paws struck the glass with a sharp crack. The mirror shuddered, the fractured lines deepening, spiderwebbing out. Todd yanked him back, his breath coming fast. "Easy. Indy, easy." And then, in the mirror, behind his reflection, something moved. A shape. A shadow taller than the doorway. It leaned close behind his reflected self, its head cocked at an unnatural angle, a grin stretching too wide across a face that wasn't fully formed. Todd spun around. The room was empty. But when he turned back to the mirror, the figure was still there. Now closer. Almost pressing against the glass. Its grin had widened, splitting the face too far. Indy erupted, barking so violently it shook his whole body. Without thinking, Todd grabbed a broken drawer from the floor and hurled it at the mirror. The glass shattered with a deafening crash, shards exploding across the room. The reflection vanished. The silence that followed was suffocating. Only Indy's ragged growls filled the space. Todd backed into the hall, dragging Indy with him. His hands trembled. His chest burned with every breath. That hadn't been a hallucination. That hadn't been exhaustion. Something was here. And it was aware of them. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Todd abandoned the upstairs entirely, retreating to the relative safety of the living room. He boarded up the broken mirror's doorway with an old chair and shut the hall off in his mind, as if ignoring it would make it disappear. But the house didn't let him forget. After dark, the noises began. Soft at first, scraping sounds along the walls, as though nails dragged down the wallpaper. Then whispers, faint and indistinct, bleeding through the floorboards. Indy paced back and forth, low growls never stopping. His ears twitched constantly, tracking sounds Todd couldn't hear. Around midnight, the living room grew colder. Todd's breath fogged in the beam of his flashlight. Indy stopped pacing and stood rigid, staring toward the staircase. His growl deepened into a snarl. And then, footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Coming down the stairs. Todd's skin crawled. His grip tightened on the flashlight, knuckles white. He aimed it at the staircase. The beam revealed nothing. Empty steps, stretching into darkness. But the sound continued, deliberate, one step at a time. Indy barked furiously, lunging toward the stairs. Todd barely held him back. The footsteps reached the bottom. Paused. And then a voice, low and guttural, hissed from the darkness. "Good boy." Todd's heart nearly stopped. The words dripped with mockery, with hunger. They weren't meant for him. They were directed at Indy. The dog answered with a roar, snapping his teeth, his whole body vibrating with rage. Something shifted in the dark, just beyond the flashlight's reach, a ripple of shadow, denser than night. Todd staggered back, panic surging. "Stay back." His voice shook. "Stay the hell away from us." The shadows pulsed, reaching across the floor like black smoke. Indy lunged, snapping, forcing them back with snarls that echoed through the house. For one horrifying moment, Todd swore he saw a hand emerge from the darkness, long fingers, too many joints, curling across the floor toward him. Indy sank his teeth into the blackness, and the house erupted with a sound that wasn't a scream, wasn't a roar, but something deeper. Something primal and furious. The shadows recoiled, pulling back into the staircase, vanishing into the dark. The room fell silent again. The air warmed, though only slightly. Indy stood rigid, chest heaving, a growl still rumbling deep in his throat. His fur was bristled, but his eyes were bright, fierce. He looked back at Todd as if to say, "I won't let it touch you." Todd dropped to his knees beside him, clutching his fur, trembling. "Good boy," he whispered, voice breaking. "God, you're a good boy." But the words felt hollow. Because he knew the truth. The house had called Indy that first. And it wasn't done with them. By the next morning, Todd looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. His face was gray, his eyes bloodshot, his hands trembling as he fumbled with the coffee pot. Indy stayed close, his golden fur matted from pacing all night. The dog hadn't rested either, he'd kept watch, growling whenever the house creaked, barking when the whispers pressed too close. The farmhouse felt different in daylight, but not safer. The walls seemed to lean in. The air smelled faintly of something rotten, sweet and sour at once, as if mold had taken root in the bones of the place. Even the light that forced its way through the grime-streaked windows looked sickly, like it was filtered through something not of this world. Todd rubbed his eyes and stared at his dog. "I don't know what the hell this is, Indy," he whispered. "But we're gonna beat it. You hear me? We're gonna make this work." Indy wagged his tail once, faintly, then turned his head toward the staircase. A low growl bubbled in his throat. Todd followed his gaze. At the top of the stairs, the hallway lay in shadow. The air shimmered faintly, like heat rising from asphalt, though the air in the house was cold. Todd's stomach twisted. He couldn't look too long. It was like the darkness itself was staring back. By afternoon, Todd forced himself outside. He couldn't spend another entire day cowering inside that house. The air out in the yard felt cleaner, sharper, though the woods surrounding the property were still unnervingly silent. He hauled a few boxes from the truck into the shed out back. Indy stayed glued to him, pacing circles, never letting Todd step too far away. His ears twitched toward the tree line often, a constant reminder that the danger wasn't gone. At one point, Indy froze, nose lifted. His body stiffened, tail rigid. He growled low, deep in his chest. Todd set the box down carefully. "What is it, boy?" Then he heard it too. Whistling. A tune carried faintly on the air, slow and broken. It didn't sound close, but it didn't sound far either, like it was winding through the trees, weaving around them. Todd's skin prickled. "Hello?" he called, instantly regretting it. His voice sounded small, swallowed by the silence that followed. The whistling stopped. For a long, breathless moment, the woods were still. Then Indy erupted, barking furiously, his whole body straining toward the trees. His bark wasn't playful, it was warning, protective, ready to fight. Todd grabbed his collar, heart hammering. No. Stay with me. But even as he pulled Indy back, he thought he saw something move among the trees again. A tall figure. Watching. And this time, it whistled again. The same broken tune. Indy snarled so violently that Todd felt the vibration through the collar. The figure melted into the shadows, gone in an instant. The whistling echoed faintly until it wasn't sound anymore, it was inside. The tune hummed against Todd's teeth, vibrating in his skull. Indy howled, a raw, primal sound. That ripped through the yard. Then, as suddenly as it came, it stopped. The woods fell silent once more. Todd stood there shaking, gripping Indy like a lifeline. They're trying to lure you, he whispered, realization sinking into his gut. They're trying to get you. Indy licked his hand, eyes fierce and bright. His loyalty burned stronger than the fear. But Todd knew, this was only the beginning. That night, the house grew crueler. The scratching in the walls started as soon as the sun set. Louder than before. More deliberate. Like claws digging through plaster, closer and closer. Todd tried to drown it out with the radio, but the static bled into whispers. Faint, sing-song voices that hissed Indy's name. Indy. The dog's ears perked, body rigid. He growled at the radio itself, as if he knew the voices were coming from beyond it. Todd yanked the plug from the socket. The whispers didn't stop. They slithered through the house, crawling under doors, curling in the corners. Then came the thumping. Upstairs. Slow, dragging footsteps. Back and forth. Back and forth. Todd gripped the flashlight. His whole body screamed to stay put, to ignore it, but Indy wouldn't allow that. The dog lunged toward the stairs, barking furiously, daring whatever it was to come closer. Todd followed, his chest tight. I swear, boy, if you charge headfirst into hell, I'm coming right after you. The steps creaked under their feet as they climbed. The hall stretched ahead, doors yawning open like mouths. And then, Todd froze. Indy was growling at something inside the farthest room. His teeth glistened, his body tense like a bowstring. Todd aimed the flashlight. A shape crouched in the corner. At first, Todd thought it was a man, tall and thin, its limbs too long. But the beam revealed skin that wasn't skin, it looked wet, translucent, as though stretched too tightly over bones. Its head jerked unnaturally, too fast, as if its neck were broken but refusing to fall. And in its hand. Todd's stomach lurched, it dangled a leash. A worn, cracked leather leash. It lifted the leash slowly, tilting its head. When it opened its mouth, the voice that came out was low and wet, like something gurgling through water. Good boy. Indy snarled, louder than Todd had ever heard, his body quivering with fury. The sound seemed to drive the figure back, its grin faltering. Todd's fear turned to rage. Stay the hell away from him. The figure hissed, retreating into the corner shadows, melting as if it were made of smoke. The leash dropped to the floor with a wet thud. Todd's flashlight beam cut only emptiness now. Indy ran forward, teeth snapping at the shadows, but they were gone. The leash lay on the floor. Real. Tangible. Todd picked it up with trembling hands. The leather was cold, damp. Scratched into its surface were words, jagged and uneven. Bring him to U.S. Todd's blood froze. He dropped it instantly, bile rising in his throat. Indy barked. Furiously, pawing at the spot where the figure had stood. His fury was unmatched, but Todd saw it for what it was, desperation. Indy wasn't just defending Todd anymore. He was fighting something that wanted him. And the house was making its intentions clearer with every passing night. It didn't want Todd. It wanted Indy. The next morning, Todd sat at the kitchen table, the leash lying between him and Indy. He hadn't slept at all. His coffee sat cold in its cup. Indy rested his head on Todd's knee, as if sensing his thoughts. "I won't let them take you," Todd whispered. His voice cracked. "You're all I have, boy. You're everything. And they know that. That's why they want you." Indy's tail thumped once against the floor. His eyes shone with the kind of loyalty only a dog could hold, unwavering, pure. But Todd couldn't ignore the truth anymore. The house was testing them. Probing. Trying to separate them. And sooner or later, it wouldn't just be shadows. It would come for Indy directly. That night, it did. Todd awoke to the sound of claws scratching at the bedroom door. Not Indy's. Something heavier. Longer. Indy was already on his feet, hackles raised, teeth bared. His growls vibrated through the room like thunder. The scratching stopped. Then came the voice. Not whispered this time. Clear. Mocking. "Indy. Come." The door creaked. Slowly. Deliberately. Todd fumbled for the flashlight, shining it at the door. The handle twisted, rattled. Indy barked so furiously that spit flew from his mouth. And then the door burst open. Darkness poured in like smoke, curling, writhing. From within it, arms stretched, long, skeletal, grasping. They reached not for Todd, but for Indy. Todd screamed, lunging forward. No. Indy met the arms head-on. The dog leapt into the darkness, teeth sinking into the shadow flesh. A sound erupted, so loud, so alien, it rattled the glass in the windows. The arms recoiled, retreating back into the hallway. Indy landed, snarling, ready for more. Todd grabbed him, pulling him back, slamming the door shut. His chest heaved, tears stinging his eyes. The house went still again. But Todd knew. That hadn't been the final attempt. The house had marked Indy. And next time, it would come harder. The night came down like a black shroud. The sky was heavy with clouds, moonless, starless, as though the heavens themselves wanted no part of what was about to unfold inside that isolated farmhouse. Todd sat on the edge of his bed, unable to sleep. Indy lay at his feet, but the dog wasn't resting either. His ears twitched, his head jerked at sounds only he could hear. The air in the room was stifling, clotted, heavy with a pressure Todd couldn't quite name. He told himself it was the creaks of an old house settling. He told himself it was the wind scraping against the siding. He told himself the scratches he heard were from raccoons or rats in the walls. But he knew he was lying. Indy suddenly lifted his head and let out a low, warning growl. The hairs on his back rose like bristles. Todd's stomach tightened. Not again, he thought. Please not tonight. The sound came again, a slow, deliberate scratching. Not the skitter of mice. Not the claws of a raccoon. This was something heavier. Something patient. Something purposeful. The sound came from the wall just behind Todd's headboard. Todd pressed his palms against the wall. The vibration came through the wood, deep and sickening, like something was moving within the very bones of the house. Indy stood up, barking sharply, his body pressed between Todd and the wall. Then, the scratching stopped. Todd held his breath. Indy growled again, throat deep and guttural. His eyes glowed in the faint sliver of light that came from the hallway. And then. Thump. The wall buckled outward, just slightly. As if something had pushed from the other side. Todd stumbled back, his heart hammering, his breath shallow. Indy barked furiously, lunging at the wall, teeth snapping. The bulge smoothed back, as though whatever was there had withdrawn. Silence hung heavy in the room, broken only by Indy's growling and Todd's ragged breaths. Todd grabbed his flashlight from the nightstand, hand trembling. He flicked it on and shined the beam across the wall. Nothing. No cracks. No damage. Just faded wallpaper and wood. But he knew. Something was there. And it wasn't done with him. The first breach. Todd couldn't stay in that room. He grabbed his jacket, slid his boots on, and Indy stayed glued to his side. They went into the hallway, every step echoing too loudly. The house seemed to sigh around them, old timbers groaning in a language Todd couldn't understand. Halfway down the hallway, Indy stopped. His ears flicked. His nose lifted. He let out a sharp whine. Todd froze. From inside the walls came a voice. Not a sound. A voice. Faint. Wet. Whispering. Words stretched too long, syllables distorted. Good boy. Todd's blood froze. He turned slowly, his flashlight beam trembling over the peeling wallpaper. Indy's growl rumbled low, vibrating through the floor. His eyes locked on one spot where the voice had come from. Come play, good boy. The wall shuddered. Something inside slammed against it, hard enough to rattle the framed photos. The drywall cracked, a jagged line splitting downward like a wound. Todd stumbled backward. Indy lunged forward, snarling savagely, teeth bared, barking with a fury Todd had never heard before. The wall bulged again, and then split open. Wood splinters snapped, plaster dust filled the air, and a pale, slick hand shot through the crack. Long, twisted fingers ended in black claws, curling through the air like hooks. Todd screamed. Indy attacked. The dog hurled himself at the hand, teeth sinking into the wrist. The thing inside the wall let out a shriek, high, piercing, not human, not animal. The sound burned Todd's eardrums, set his teeth on edge, made bile rise in his throat. The hand writhed, yanking back, trying to drag Indy into the wall with it. But Indy wouldn't let go. His teeth were locked, his body shaking violently as he thrashed. Blood, not red, but black and tar-like, spurted out, coating the wallpaper, dripping down to the floorboards. The stench was unbearable, rotten metal mixed with sulfur. Todd grabbed Indy's collar, pulling him back just as the thing withdrew into the wall. The hand disappeared. The crack sealed itself, wood snapping back together like flesh knitting shut. And then silence. Only Indy's heavy panting. Only Todd's quaking breath. The wall was whole again. No blood. No crack. As if nothing had happened. The smell of rot. Todd wanted to leave. He wanted to pack his truck and drive until the road vanished behind him. But he couldn't. Somehow, he knew leaving wouldn't save him. This house wanted him. The following morning, Todd tried to convince himself it was exhaustion, that maybe he had dreamt it all. But Indy wouldn't leave that hallway. The dog sat in front of the wall for hours, hackles raised, staring, growling under his breath. By midday, the smell began. It started faintly, just a whiff of rot, like roadkill left too long in the sun. Then stronger, heavier, choking the air until Todd gagged. It seeped from the walls, a stench of decay and mold and burnt flesh. Todd tore through the house looking for the source, checking the basement, the attic, the kitchen. Nothing. But when he returned to the hallway, the smell was strongest there. Strongest at the wall where the hand had burst through. Indy barked at the wall until his throat went raw. That night, the scratching returned. The thing crawls. Todd woke to Indy's growls again. The sound of claws dragged slowly, agonizingly, across the inside of the wall. Then came the sound of something crawling. It moved inside the walls, slow, dragging, scraping. Not like a rat. Not like a raccoon. Something larger. Something dragging its weight along. Todd tracked the sound as it moved from the hallway to the ceiling above his room. He looked up, heart hammering, as dust rained down from the ceiling tiles. Indy barked savagely, running back and forth, trying to follow the sound. The crawling stopped above them. And then. Thump. A heavy weight dropped directly overhead. The ceiling bowed slightly, dust and plaster sprinkling down. Indy snarled, teeth flashing in the dark. Another thump. Closer to the edge. Todd pointed his flashlight upward, his breath ragged. The ceiling bulged. Something huge pressed against it, shifting beneath the plaster, like a body crawling on the wrong side of the skin. Todd saw the outline of limbs, too many limbs, spidering outward. Indy lunged upward, barking furiously. The plaster cracked. Tiny lines split open, raining dust onto Todd's bed. And then. Screech. The sound filled the house. Nails on glass. Metal on bone. A voice not meant for human ears. Todd clapped his hands over his ears. Indy howled. And then, the weight withdrew. The ceiling went still. The scratching faded into silence. The eye. Todd didn't sleep. Indy didn't either. At dawn, Todd stumbled into the hallway. The smell of rot was so heavy it clung to his skin, seeped into his clothes. And then he saw it. At eye level, in the wall where the crack had been. A hole. Small. Jagged. Fresh. And inside the hole. An eye. Wet. Glossy. Human-sized but not human-shaped. Too round, too black, reflecting no light. It blinked sideways, reptilian, the eyelid sliding horizontally. It stared directly at him. Todd froze, bile rising in his throat. Indy barked furiously, lunging at the wall. The eye didn't flinch. It just watched. Todd stumbled backward, shaking his head. No, 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 no. The eye widened. The wet sound of flesh stretched. A thin line of a smile appeared beneath it, carved into the wall, teeth pressing outward through the plaster. The voice came again, bubbling and wet. Good buoy. Indy hurled himself at the wall, teeth gnashing, body slamming into the plaster. The wall shook with the force, dust raining down. The eye rolled back into the darkness, disappearing. The smile lingered a moment longer. Then the wall sealed shut. Gone. But Todd knew. It wasn't gone. It was inside. The house was no longer just a house. By now, Todd understood that whatever had taken root inside these walls was alive, breathing, waiting, feeding. The farmhouse had shifted into something crueler, something that wore its history like a second skin. The wallpaper no longer peeled in quiet neglect, it hung in jagged strips that looked like torn flesh. Shadows no longer clung passively to corners, they rippled, twitched, and slithered along walls as though eager to escape. And always, the whispers. They slithered through the air at night, curling beneath doors and under blankets, nestling into Todd's ears until he woke drenched in sweat, Indy's warm body pressed against his side like a barrier. Sometimes the whispers called his name. Sometimes they laughed, high and brittle. Sometimes they moaned as if caught in endless suffering. Tonight, though, was worse. It began with the scratching. Todd jolted awake in his bed to the sound of claws raking wood. For a split second he thought Indy was pawing at the door, but then he felt the weight of his dog beside him, tense, muscles coiled, teeth bared in a silent snarl. The scratching wasn't coming from the floor. It was coming from inside the walls. Indy growled, his low rumble vibrating against Todd's ribs. The sound grew louder, faster, frenzied, as if something was trying to dig its way out of the plaster. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Jesus Christ, Todd whispered, clutching Indy's collar. Then it stopped. The silence was worse. Todd sat frozen in bed, heart hammering, staring into the dark. He could feel it, the presence pressing against him like a hand against glass. Watching. Waiting. Indy's ears pricked, his hackles raised so high it looked like his entire back was bristling. And then, in the stillness, the bedroom door creaked. It opened, slow, deliberate, as though someone had been waiting for the right moment. The hall beyond gaped like a throat. Todd's mouth went dry. He grabbed the flashlight on his nightstand and clicked it on. The beam cut across the hallway. Empty. But the air moved. A shape slipped just out of sight, darting along the walls like oil in water. Todd's skin prickled with gooseflesh as his pulse thundered in his ears. "Stay with me, Indy," he breathed. The dog leapt from the bed and padded forward, his growl louder now, deeper, his body taut like a drawn bow. They stepped into the hallway together. The smell hit them first. It was foul, sweet rot and coppery decay, the stench of something that had been dead too long yet still lingered. Todd gagged, clapping a hand over his nose. Indy barked once, sharp, furious, the sound echoing off the warped walls. The scratching started again. This time from the floor beneath their feet. Todd felt it, like fingers clawing upward, desperate to break through the old wood. His flashlight trembled in his hand as he swept the beam down the hallway. And then, he saw them. Hands. Dozens of them. Thin, pale arms pushed up through the floorboards as if the wood were nothing but soft soil. Long fingers curled and clawed, nails broken and bleeding, stretching toward Todd and his dog. "Back!" Todd shouted, stumbling. Indy lunged, barking viciously, snapping at the phantom hands. But they didn't stop. The arms stretched farther, reaching, grasping, their nails catching fabric and hair. One set of fingers closed around Todd's ankle, icy cold, like plunging his leg into a grave. He screamed, kicking hard, wrenching free. Blood welled where the nails had cut into his skin. Indy tore forward, biting at the hands, his teeth passing through them yet somehow making them recoil. Each time he lunged, the hands writhed and withdrew, but they never vanished completely, they only shifted, retreating a few feet, circling back. "Indy, come!" Todd shouted, stumbling toward the stairs. But the stairs weren't there. The hallway stretched impossibly long, the walls bending inward, the wallpaper pulsing like veins. Todd's flashlight flickered, catching glimpses of faces pressed against the walls, gray, eyeless faces mouthing silent screams. "Not real," Todd whispered, voice shaking. "It's not real." But Indy barked again, furious, determined. He darted ahead, teeth snapping at the shadows. Todd followed, legs heavy, lungs burning, until finally, the hallway snapped back to normal. The stairs reappeared, creaking beneath his weight as he half fell down them. He crashed into the living room, Indy at his heels. Silence. The air was still again. The walls were only walls. The floorboards were whole, unmarred. Todd collapsed onto the couch, gasping for breath. Indy jumped up beside him, panting, his eyes fixed on the darkened corners of the room. His body trembled, but his head stayed high, ears pricked. Todd stroked the dog's fur with shaking hands. "Good boy," he whispered, voice breaking. "Good boy." But his relief was short-lived. From the kitchen, the sound of running water began. The faucet. Todd froze. The kitchen sink turned on full blast. The water gushed, but the smell was wrong, metallic, thick. Todd's stomach twisted as he forced himself to look. The sink overflowed. Blood poured from the faucet, thick and endless, gurgling over the counter, cascading onto the floor. It spread across the tile, seeping into the living room carpet, warm and black in the faint glow of the flashlight. Indy barked wildly, teeth bared. Todd gagged, stumbling backward as the blood crept closer. It carried with it scraps of hair, broken teeth, tiny bones. Then, through the rushing torrent, came a voice. Deep. Mocking. Drawn out in a long whisper. Good boy. Todd's blood turned to ice. He spun, searching the shadows, but no one was there. The voice came again, closer this time, rasping against his ear. Good boy. Indy snarled, leaping toward the corner of the room, snapping at the air. His growl was pure fury, his body vibrating with rage. Todd dropped to his knees beside him, pressing his forehead to the dog's fur as tears stung his eyes. The house laughed. Low at first, then louder, walls vibrating, floorboards shuddering, ceiling groaning as the sound built into a chorus of voices. Male, female, child, all overlapping in hideous harmony. Good boy. Good boy. Good boy. Todd clamped his hands over his ears. Indy barked and barked, each snap of his jaws desperate, defiant. Then, silence. The blood was gone. The faucet was dry. The voices ended as if cut off mid-breath. Only Indy remained, pressed against Todd's side, his chest heaving, his eyes sharp and unyielding. Todd whispered hoarsely, "What do they want from us?" Indy didn't answer, of course. But the dog's growl, the way his body trembled with both fear and determination, was answer enough. They weren't going to stop. And Todd wasn't sure how much longer either of them could survive it. The house was no longer a house. Its bones had split apart, the foundation yawning like a wound in the earth. Floorboards pulsed with veins of blackness, stretching, writhing, and climbing the walls like arteries feeding an ancient, unseen heart. The walls swelled in and out, as though the entire structure breathed in unison with the dark force it harbored. Todd staggered down the hallway, Indy at his side, barking furiously into the chaos. Shadows swam over the ceiling like ink poured into water. The smell, sulfur, rot, and wet earth, burned the inside of Todd's nose and clung to his tongue. "Stay with me, boy," Todd muttered, though his voice trembled. His flashlight flickered, then died, leaving them only in the twitching glow of the warped lamps and the amber shine of Indy's furious eyes. The voices whispered again, dozens at once. "Todd, come down, come join us. The dog won't save you. He will betray you, when it matters most." Todd tried to shut them out, gripping the cold metal of the crowbar he carried. His knuckles were white, slick with sweat. Indy growled low, teeth bared, fur bristling. His body pressed against Todd's leg protectively, as if daring the shadows to reach for his human. And then they did. The hallway of hands. From the walls sprouted hands, rotting, bone-thin, their nails clawing, reaching. Dozens, then hundreds. They dragged along Todd's clothes, scratching welts into his skin, trying to seize him and pull him into the walls themselves. Todd screamed and swung wildly, the crowbar smashing brittle fingers that cracked like dry twigs. But for every hand he broke, more reached out, grasping, moaning. Indy launched himself, tearing into one of the hands at Todd's shoulder. His teeth sank in deep, ripping, pulling the thing free. The hand shrieked in a human voice as black ichor sprayed across the floor. Indy spat it out, snarling, blood dripping from his snout. "Good boy." Todd gasped, swinging again, pulling free from the grip of the house. Together they stumbled forward, toward the stairs leading down. The voices grew louder. "He cannot leave. You will never take him from us." The basement door opened by itself, groaning, spilling a black light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The descent. Every instinct in Todd's body screamed not to go down. But he knew, somehow, that the heart of it all, the thing poisoning his house, trying to claim his soul, was waiting below. Indy barked once, short and sharp, then patted ahead. "Wait, Indy." Todd choked, but his dog ignored him. Indy's bravery wasn't reckless, it was instinct. He would go first, even into hell itself, if it meant protecting the one he loved. Todd followed. Each step downward stretched, the staircase longer than it had any right to be. The deeper they went, the colder it became, their breath fogging in the darkness. The walls glistened, wet, as if carved from raw flesh. At the bottom, they found it. The heart of the house. The basement had become a cavern, the ceiling lost in endless shadow. In the center, something writhed, a mass of black tendrils wrapped around a pulsing red heart the size of a car. It beat slowly, wetly, spraying black fluid with every contraction. Faces pushed against its surface, screaming, pleading, then sinking back into the flesh. And from the base of the heart rose a figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs stretching like cords of shadow. Its head was faceless, but where its mouth should be gaped a pit of endless teeth, grinding, chewing, whispering all at once. Indy barked and lunged forward, teeth snapping at the tendrils slithering across the ground. The beast turned its gaping maw toward the dog and laughed, a laugh that was all voices, all directions. A loyal pet, but pets must die first. Todd, the voices called, soft, sweet, almost maternal. Give us the dog. Give us his soul, and you will live. No more fear. No more loneliness. Just peace. Todd's knees buckled. The weight of the voices pressed against his skull like a vice, filling him with visions, his dead parents smiling, his ex-wife holding him, his childhood friends laughing again. If he gave Indy, he could have them all back. But Indy barked again, standing between Todd and the entity, teeth gleaming in the dark. His growl was pure defiance, vibrating with rage. No, Todd whispered, then shouted, "No." The monster's tendrils lashed forward. One struck Todd across the chest, throwing him against the wall. His ribs cracked, he gasped for air. Indy leapt onto a tendril, biting deep, shaking his head violently until the black flesh ripped apart. The creature shrieked in 100 voices, the ground trembling. Todd, the voices screamed. He cannot save you. He will die screaming. Todd struggled to his feet, coughing blood, crowbar still in hand. He looked at Indy, bloodied, snarling, fearless, and something in him hardened. Then we die together, he growled. Todd charged. He swung the crowbar into the writhing heart, embedding the steel deep into its pulsing flesh. The creature roared, the room shaking violently. Tendrils whipped around Todd, stabbing into his arms, legs, chest. He screamed, but didn't let go. Indy lunged at the heart too, biting into its veins, tearing at its arteries. Black blood sprayed over his fur, but he didn't stop. He tore deeper, faster, until his muzzle was drenched in gore. The entity shrieked, collapsing inward. Faces ripped open along its body, screaming in anguish. But the tendrils pierced deeper into Todd, wrapping around his body, pulling him toward the heart. Todd. The voice wasn't the monster's. It was inside his head. It was Indy's. For the first time, Todd heard his dog's voice, not a bark, not a growl, but words. Run, Todd. Please, run. Todd's heart shattered. He reached toward Indy, tears streaming. No, no, I'm not leaving you. But the tendrils dragged Indy next. Wrapping around his body. He fought, snapping, thrashing, biting through flesh, but they held him fast. The heart convulsed, pulling them both in. Todd felt darkness swallow him, felt the crushing weight of the heart around him, dragging him into its endless maw. Indy twisted his head, meeting Todd's eyes one last time. His growl softened into something else, an unshakable, loyal love. Todd whispered, "Good boy." And with one last defiant snarl, Indy ripped into the heart's core with everything he had left. The world erupted. The house exploded from within. The ground split apart, light, blinding, pure, rushed through the cracks, tearing the shadows to pieces. The screaming voices were silenced in an instant. When the dust settled, there was nothing left but ruin. The house had collapsed into itself, leaving only a crater where the basement had been. Todd awoke lying in the dirt, his body broken but alive. Beside him lay Indy. His fur was matted, his body torn, his chest barely rising. Todd pulled him into his arms, sobbing, clutching him tight. "Stay with me, boy. Please, please." Indy licked his hand once, weakly, his eyes meeting Todd's with warmth even in the face of death. And then, with a sigh, he went still. Todd screamed into the night, rocking his dog's body against his chest. The house was gone. The monster was gone. But so was Indy. The world was silent. Weeks later, Todd lived in a small apartment, his body scarred, his nights haunted by dreams of the heart and the voices. But sometimes, in the stillness before dawn, he swore he felt a warm weight press against the side of his bed. He swore he heard claws clicking softly across the floor. And once, in the deepest dark of night, he heard a bark, clear, sharp, protective. Todd smiled through his tears. "Good boy," he whispered.